Today we are tackling the old ATG missile versus plasma shrimp debate. The ATG missile Mark Uno is a green rarity item which, when you pick it up, has a 10% chance to fire a missile that deals 300% plus 300% per stack total damage. When you get that lucky 10% proc chance and the missile does fire off, as you can see here, it will automatically home in on the enemy. And if its current target is killed before reaching its destination, it will find a new enemy and lock onto that one. On the other hand, we have the plasma shrimp, the void variant of this item, brought to you by Bubba Gump, which instead of a 10% chance to fire off, you get a shield equal to 10% of your maximum health, and while you have a shield active, hitting an enemy with an attack will fire a missile that does 40% plus an additional 50% per stack of total damage. Keep in mind that just like all other void items, the plasma shrimp will corrupt any and all ATGs that you currently have in your inventory, as well as any ones that you pick up along the way afterwards. A key thing to remember with the plasma shrimp is that you need to have that shield up for the missiles to fire off. If you don't have that shield up, let's say you take a bit of damage, you will completely lose that missile output and will have to wait until your shield recharges until they start firing off again. Another thing to keep in mind about the plasma shrimp is, unlike the ATG, which will find a new target if its original target has already been killed, the plasma shrimp does not do this at all. Those little missiles will just fly around aimlessly like the little shrimps they are. So now that we know a little bit about each of these two items, which one is better? As a general rule of thumb, you want to be rocking with the plasma shrimp, especially with any survivors with a high base fire rate for their attacks, because as long as you keep those shields up, the missiles will keep on coming, so you can really dish out some major damage. While the plasma shrimp is better on most survivors in the majority of situations, there are a couple of exceptions to this rule and situations where you definitely should be keeping the ATG and avoiding corrupting into the plasma shrimp. Exception numero uno is if you are playing as Rex and you are using his purple plant abilities, which you should be because they are better in every case scenario unless you're playing on Eclipse 8. In this situation, since these abilities will take away a portion of his health in exchange for the attack, it is really difficult to keep your shields up, and because of this, you aren't able to fire off the plasma shrimp missiles, rendering it pretty useless. Because every time you use an attack, you're going to be losing those shields and you have to wait for it to recharge again. Exception numero dos is if you are playing as railgunner and loader. Don't get me wrong, plasma shrimp's still pretty decent on them. However, for these two survivors in particular, whose playstyle really focuses around single high damage but low frequency attacks, it's usually better to stick with the ATGs because the 300% per stack total damage multiplier on these attacks outweighs the downside, which is that it only fires off 10% of the time, as compared to the plasma shrimp, which will always fire off if the shield's up, but will only do 40% per stack total damage. Exception numero tres is if Clint Eastwood asks you if you're feeling lucky, punk, and you respond, yes, I picked up a 57-leaf clover, then you definitely do not want to corrupt into plasma shrimp. Keep the ATG missile at all costs because it essentially doubles the rate at which it fires off in every situation and becomes straight up busted. So once again, if you're rocking the Lucky Charms build, do not go plasma shrimp. Keep that ATG. Of course, there's always an exception to the exception, and the exception to the exception here is the Beetle tendency. If you're rocking the Beetlejuice build here and you're just hanging around, then you most definitely want to pick up the Plasma Shrimp, because what this beetle does, Transcendence, is turn all your health into shields. And this means that you are permanently going to be firing off those Plasma Shrimpies. So if you pick up the Transcendence Lunar item and you're rocking that beetle build, then you definitely want to go Plasma Shrimp and take advantage of that. I guess this could also happen if you are just rocking a ton of shield generators, but this is a little more rare of a situation where you'd have so many personal shield generators that you would basically have perma uptime on the Plasma Shrimp as well. Last but not least, this isn't an exception to the rule, but just a little bit of general knowledge. But the ICBM red item pairs perfectly with both the ATG and the Plasma Shrimp. What the ICBM does is just triples the amount of missiles fired. So if you see this bad Larry out in the wild, pick it up, because if you got ATG, you're going full on Tony Stark, Iron Man 1 opening scene, Jericho missile. And if you got the Plasma Shrimp, well, let's just say the chef will be cooking. Shrimp cocktail, baby. Anyways, that's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning on in, and we'll catch you next time. Adios, amigos.